Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Arizona Illustrated for Friday, the 8th of June, 2012. I'm Jim Ninsel, host of Political Roundtable, our weekly analysis and commentary on local, state, and national politics. Tonight on the Roundtable, we'll find out what's going on with the Rio Nuevo Board and look at Tucson City Council's consideration of a new code of conduct in the wake of one councilman's alcohol-fueled misbehavior. Joining me this evening is Democratic Party Chairman Jeff Rogers, Pima County Republican Party Chairwoman Carolyn Cox, and Ward 6 City Councilman Steve Kosachik. Thanks to all of you for being here. Jeff, it's been a busy political week, but let's start with the special election in Congressional District 8. Tuesday is Election Day, and this weekend, Gabrielle Giffords will actually be coming to Tucson. We haven't seen much of Congresswoman or former Congresswoman Giffords in this campaign. Was that a strategy, you think, on the part of the Barber campaign?
I think there's a sense in which, people need to know that Ron Barber is his own man. He worked for and led one of the finest constituent services offices in all of America for any congressperson, and worked well for a wonderful congresswoman. But Ron Barber is his own man, and it's Ron Barber we're sending to Congress. It's not Gabby's seat, it's the people's seat, and Ron wants to show the people he is his own man, and I think he's done a fine job of doing that. But it is nice in this final weekend for the final push to get out the vote that we will get to see the Congresswoman and her husband for a nice event. I mean, we all look forward to seeing Calexico. They're her favorite band and growing into one of my favorite bands, certainly locally. So I'm really looking forward to it, and it's a nice way to reward a lot of the volunteers who've put in tireless hours working the phone lines and walking the streets and knocking on doors to have a nice concert downtown, and also to bring people downtown and show them that downtown is still working despite the construction work. Business is still open, and we can still have some fun down there.
And Carolyn, we've had millions of dollars spent just over the last few months on this race. It seems as though the Republican argument has been that Ron Barber will be a rubber stamp for the Obama administration. The Democrats' argument have been that Jesse Kelly is too extreme for the district. What do you see as the closing arguments here in the final days of the campaign?
Well, I think that Jesse's absolutely correct on the stand that he has taken on Medicare. I mean, he has been very clear, even though he's been quoted out of context, but that there would be no changes for the people who are currently retired. But we do have to figure out how we're going to make up the shortfalls, because as you know, the economy is down. The number of people paying into payroll taxes is down, and that's where Medicare and Social Security get their money. And so I agree with Jesse that we need to grow the economy so that there is money in there to make up the shortfall on the Medicare and Social Security. I think he's absolutely right on the energy. I've done a lot of research on that. I mean, we have a huge amount of resources here in the United States in the way of oil, natural gas, and so on. So that we are certainly can be energy independent, and we can use that to grow our economy. So I think that is absolutely correct. And, we've spent a lot of time trying to fill in the blanks on the things that the Democrats are putting out against Jesse.
Well, it's easy to see why Jesse Kelly's running away from what he was in 2010, but the groups that endorse him tell us a little bit about him. This week, the Club for Growth endorsed Jesse Kelly. They were the first organization ever to call for the elimination and privatization of Social Security, and are still calling for that. So Jesse's their boy, and they know it, just like Alapac, the hate group that endorsed him last week. They know he's their boy, no matter how hard he runs away from it.
Do you agree that the federal workers have a private account with their federal thrift savings program that is invested in index funds? I mean, it's the way to go. There's no question that, and that's why all of the private corporations are switching to 401ks and so on. So that is the future, but it's not what should happen to the current retirees, and he knows that. And there's never been any question about that.
Okay, I want to bring in Councilman Kosachik here, because you're one of the people who have actually crossed party lines to support Ron Barber in this race, and I just want to ask you about why you decided to do that.
Do I get to break the tie?
Yeah.
So, okay. I don't know about the groups that are supporting Jesse Kelly. I don't follow it that intently, but I do know that I sat in debates here on campus in 2010, and heard comments about Medicare, medical coverage being a privilege, about Social Security being privatized, and so all the arguments about, well, the Democrats are taking quotes out of context. I sat and I listened to them, Carolyn, and Sam Stone sits in that seat week after week, and when he's not trashing me, he's discussing the evolution of Jesse Kelly's positions over time. So I think what we'll see on Tuesday is the voters in this district saying whether or not they want a mature individual who has been invested in this community for over 2 decades, or some relative to him, young guy who flew into town when he heard there was an election going to happen, and if he loses, when he loses, he'll probably fly back to Texas and go to work for his dad again.
I would have to say that Ron Barber, his ideas of saying that he will protect the middle class, believe me, unless our economy grows, there's no place to get money for the entitlements except from the middle class by raising taxes. And, I have got a publication here that says that the Medicare tax would have to go up to like over 6% in order to cover Medicare costs if we do it through taxation. So he is not going to protect the middle class unless he's willing to consider energy and some other things like that to generate revenue and get our economy going.
And Jeff, a lot of people have already voted in this race. What do we know about the early ballots that are coming in here?
Well, thus far we know that there's approximately 51,000 Democratic ballots cast. Doesn't mean they voted Democrat in every case. And 56,700 Republican ballots, for a difference of about 5,700 between Democrats and Republicans, if you think that they all voted that way. But then again, there's 31,779 independent ballots. That's a lot. So the independents are going to decide this election no matter what. We expect a large amount of crossover votes. There are a lot of people who think a lot like Steve does, a lot of Republicans who say, I'm a conservative, principled Republican, but Jesse Kelly's just too far out there for me. And I think so. We'll see a lot of crossover vote, and we'll see what the independents do. We're confident that most of them will break our way in this race, but we'll soon see in, I think, 5 days.
And Carolyn, your predictions for election night?
Well, my predictions are that the voters are going to realize that if you send Ron Barber, you're going to send someone just like Gabby, who was willing to vote for spending. She was willing to vote for Obamacare. And we know that Ron Barber has had fundraisers held by Nancy Pelosi in Washington, D.C. And so he's going to be her boy, and he's going to vote with her, and we're going to have more debt and more spending and more borrowing, and it's wrong, and people understand that, and I do believe that Jesse will win.
One final thing. One of the things that I've found very fascinating about this is how the turnout. And right now we're at 67% for the Democrats, 68% of the mailed out ballots. But the really extraordinary number is the 57% return rate of the independents. That's far above what it normally is. The independents are really, really interested in this election, and I think that makes it a fascinating election to see the results of.
Well, and everybody should be interested in this election because you are really voting to save your life. Because if Obamacare is not repealed, we will have rationing, we will have taxes. I mean, I do notice that the Congress is now backing off on the 2.3% excise tax because they realize that the American people are not going to go along with funding Obamacare in that manner, and we know that they've already pulled $500 billion out of Medicare. And they're going to get. Yes,
every week we talk about the big lie that they continue to talk about, and that has been disproven by every source that's looked at it carefully.
It has not been disproven. It has not been disproven.
Well, these are reductions in the future spending on Medicare. They're spending about $500 billion now, and it goes up to about $900 billion.
And the way they're going to get it is by cutting the reimbursement to physicians. That's where this is going to come from, and the physicians aren't going to treat people on Medicare anymore.
But I think there's one thing Carolyn and I can agree about, and that is we can't solve the problem through just raising taxes. We have to control the costs of health care. The costs of health care are absolutely out of control, and they have been for decades. That and the cost of education, particularly higher education, are two things which far exceed the consumer price index every year, and we've got to get control of both of them.
Right, and you do it through competition. You do it by having market-based health care.
All right, I want to move on because we had a lot going on this week in politics, and beginning with the Rio Nuevo Board, which saw a change this week. The Senate President, Steve Pearce, removed Jody Bain and Rick Grinnell from the Rio Nuevo Board and has replaced them with Fletcher McCusker and Chris Schief, a local developer. And Steve, you've been a longtime critic of the Rio Nuevo Board. What is your takeaway from this?
Well, first of all, longtime critic goes back to the election campaign. For about a decade, the city was absolutely mishandling the Rio Nuevo project in the downtown district. Unfortunately, when the legislature put their own board in back in 2010, the mismanagement continued to the point that now, since then, for the last 2 years, they have been really lapdogs for the state legislature, doing nothing but suing the city, suing the taxpayers, up to about $72 million now, trying to concoct litigation, right litigation, that would have really hosed the city of Tucson and Pima County. We were in mediation with the Rio Nuevo Board, and Jody Bain was driving up to Phoenix to meet with Al Melvin to write a memorial that basically said, City of Tucson, you're bad, and if you don't agree to new terms and conditions that we will impose on you, then you're going to suffer some consequences financially. That having been said, it is a good thing that the Senate President has now removed the leadership of the board and replaced it with people who are heavily invested in seeing the downtown and district redevelopment happen. You'll note that on next Tuesday, they're going to have this new board is going to have their first meeting. Item number 9 on their agenda is deal with bond money that has been sitting dormant for the last 2.5 years. I have been screaming about that. Jody, spend the money on the TCC. There is one thing that we can agree on. The Auditor General said the primary component of the districts is the TCC. You've got over $3 million that you can spend on it, and it's just been treading water since then. So they're already going to address it. Fletcher McCusker, Chris Schief, and whoever else they put on the board between now and the time the dust settles, I'm encouraged by it. And quite frankly, the legislature needs to tweak the legislation a little bit more so they can spend money on something other than a convention hotel in the TCC. Once they do that, the burden shifts to us. And if we can't show that we can work together productively, and I think we will with this new board, then they have the right to pull the plug. But I think we're teed up and ready to go with this group.
And Carolyn, what was your take on the decision to pull these 2 board members and replace them?
The only concern that I have is that certainly some things went wrong in all the Rio Nuevo. There was money misspent, or we're not quite sure what happened to it. And unfortunately, in order to get records from the city, the Rio Nuevo Board had to sue them, which I think is unfortunate, but that was the only way to get the records. I think we're very close. I think the Rio Nuevo Board is very close to figuring out what actually happened, whether we're looking at white-collar crime, whether we're looking at corruption, whether we're just looking at ineptitude. I don't know, but if we don't know what happened, then we don't have much of a chance to fix it. And I think it's a concern that Fletcher certainly has kind of a conflict of interest in how this money should be spent. I mean, he's already suggested that it be used to redo the storefronts of buildings that his friends own, and that's not an appropriate use for this kind of money. So I think he's a bit of a problem. And I think any kind of relationship with Sun Construction is also a problem because they were one of the people that the Rio Nuevo Board was challenging on whether or not the change orders were done properly.
Let me speak to that because the relationship with Sun Construction was Jody Bain, not Fletcher McCusker, exactly. For one thing. Number two, to suggest that the city has been withholding documents is just factually incorrect. The city of Tucson has given the Rio Nuevo Board, the reconstituted Rio Nuevo Board, reams of documents. There has been an investigation already released. There is another investigation pending, an audit pending, and the City Council and the Mayor have said again and again and again to the county, to the Auditor General, Attorney General's office, get it done. Get this, depoliticize this. Get this Paul out from over the top of this whole relationship so we can move forward. It is absolutely incorrect to say that the City of Tucson has been withholding documents from this board. We have met with them time and again. Our finance director has sat down with them time and again, explained the documents. I mean, it's even so bad as this, Carolyn. Their own trustee has filed defamation suits against 2 of the members of that board, both of whom are now gone, by the way. But this is how fractured the relationship between this board is with everybody. They've sued the city, they've sued the taxpayers, they've talked about going after the Fox, the Rialto. Everything they touch turns into litigation or legislation, and we're beyond that, and we have to do something productive in the downtown area.
Let me add one final thing here. Let's not forget to thank Steve Pierce for making this change, because these 2 people were the butt of the problem here. Jody Bain and Rick Grinnell. These 2 people were the people who were causing all of the problems here. They were even the cause of many of the people who resigned from the board because they just didn't want to participate in what was going on. And now we have a core of people like Mark Irvin and Janie Cox and Chris Sheaf and Fletcher McCusker, of people that this community can really count on, of the utmost integrity and most conscientious business people in this community. And so I for one, am really, really pleased to see this new direction for Rio Nuevo.
Yeah, I don't want to leave one thing unturned, and then I'll give it back to you. Nothing is being swept under the rug with this thing. We want the FBI investigation to come out. We want the Attorney General's audit to come out. Fortunately, the guy who has it in his inbox backed out of his run for the Attorney General. So now he has time to invest in this. Get it done. Get the facts out on the table, then we can move this relationship forward.
And I agree with that. If we can do that, so that if we can see what went wrong, so that we don't fall into the same trap again
and
as
the
we
Auditor
go
General
forward.
called it
That
gross
would be
financial
good.
mismanagement.
Yes.
And if I will give you $10 if they come up with smoking guns that says there was criminal wrongdoing.
Okay.
I think we can all probably agree that the city absolutely screwed this up for 10 years. Unfortunately, for the last 2 years, that mismanagement has continued, and this Rio Nuevo Board has been nothing but paying lip service to the state legislature. That's just equally wrong as when the city was running it.
Okay, let's move on. City Councilman Paul Cunningham this week, Steve, told the press that he does believe he has a drinking problem. He's seeking treatment for it. You've been supportive of the councilman.
Sure. You know, we're going to put together a code of conduct. We'll talk about it again next week. There is nothing that any elected official should be held to a lower standard than the taxpayers about. I mean, we should be held to the same standard. I think everybody needs to agree on that. And yet, when we put into place a code of conduct, we have to have consideration for the privacy rights of the alleged victims, consideration of the due process rights of the alleged offender, and if there's a treatable medical condition involved, we need to take that into consideration also. Paul has manned up and said, you know what, I've got an issue going on. I absolutely support him and come alongside him. I hope my colleagues on the council, I hope the community will come alongside him and say, you know what, millions of Americans recognize that alcoholism is a treatable medical disease. It's not just a frat boy going out and getting smashed. And I think that we need to embrace the fact that he has acknowledged his issue, come alongside him, support him in it, and help him through it.
And Carolyn, what's your thoughts on how this is unfolding?
Pretty much that, and I'm very happy for his family and his children, because they will also benefit if he goes in for treatment, because it is a disease and it does need to be dealt with.
And Jeff,
couldn't agree more. I think if Paul does what he should do here and takes care of his problem, then he can be a better councilman than he was in the past. And I consider him a friend, and I hope that he does exactly that. The other thing that this by happenstance caused was this sort of new look at Trio. I'm not sure Mr. Snell is pleased with the how this exposed the issue of Trio again, but that's another issue that I think you guys are going to talk about on the 12th.
Mm-hmm. That was actually my next question. So that's an examination of the trip itself and what you got out of the trip, and is it going to be a broader look at Trio as well?
Yeah, it needs to be. Irrespective of whether or not this trip was privately funded, Trio takes public dollars. The city of Tucson funds them to the tune of almost $400,000 a year, and the county more than that. So even though Mr. Snell stands up and says this was a $60,000 trip and it was all paid for by non-public dollars, the fact of the matter is that they went to one of the most expensive places in the country, Torrey Pines. Some of the public officials who went on the trip were funded by the taxpayers. They went to a city that a year and a half ago voted to boycott, Arizona, which my sense is that perhaps it might have been more intuitive to say, why don't we fly some of the San Diego people over here? Look at the Sonoran Desert, look at the mountains, look at the Saguaro Monument East, look at the assets that we have here. Instead of funding their tax base, bring them over here, and if they have experts in the field, say, here's what we've got. How would you suggest we do the revitalization of this area instead of filling their tax coffers when they're boycotting our state? Trio needs to step up to the plate. They don't have to convince guys like me. They need to convince the guy who's busting his ass out in 105-degree heat, fixing the roads, and the single mom who's living paycheck to paycheck, that they're getting a good return on their investment. When Mr. Snell is making he's making 10 times what the average earner in this community is making, absolutely it's incumbent on that organization to step up to the plate and say, here's the ROI on what we're giving to you.
And Carolyn, your thoughts on where Trio is these days?
That was a superb summary. I don't have anything to add to that. I mean, because they do take public money, so they are responsible to the taxpayers to be halfway reasonable in the things they do.
Jeff, we have another area of agreement on this program?
I agree wholeheartedly with Steve. We do need to know, are we getting the bang for the buck on this, or should we take those redevelopment dollars and put them back in the city coffers and run something out of the mayor or the city manager's office, which I understand that there is now someone on economic development in the city manager's office. And so, we need to think, are we getting any bang for our buck there? And I think the mayor and council will examine that very, very carefully.
All right. Mayor Jonathan Rothschild completed his first 6 months in office. He stopped by Arizona Illustrated earlier this week to talk about both his first 6 months and also what he sees looking forward.
In the 360, we're going to look at some bigger pictures for this whole valley. The idea of doing our annexation program a little differently, so it's more broad-based and not on a project-by-project basis. The idea of looking at self-certification programs within the city to help planning and development a little further along, rail expansion, different programs that will make the city overall a better place. In the next couple weeks, we're going to look at the possibility and the reality of doing a general obligation bond in the city for the first time in 12 years to get the money necessary to really get our roads in the shape we need them in.
Okay, Carolyn, the mayor's giving himself a A-, I think, for his first 6 months in office. Where do you grade him?
Well, I do think the roads are a real problem. And the other thing is that we have the highest debt of any county of the 15 counties in Arizona. So we've already borrowed tons of money, and I'm not sure where it went, because it certainly didn't go to repair the roads where it should have gone. I'm glad that he has begun to clean up the medians, although coming in on Speedway, they're still pretty bad. But that helps kind of a facelift for the city. The city also has a serious problem at the corner of River and Craycroft of the development that's going on out there without any attention being paid to the necessity of widening River Road to take care of all of that traffic. So there are problems.
And Steve, your assessment of the mayor's first 6 months here?
I think he's doing a good job, and I've enjoyed working with him. And I think he's really helped to focus on economic development, jobs creation. Let's also not forget that we've also got a new city manager. So both sides of the 10th floor now have new staffs in place, and I think they're focused and doing a good job. And I'm a piece of cake to control. His trouble is going to be corralling the rest of the council, and that's going to be his task moving forward. But he's doing a good job right now, and I think he's got a good focus.
Jeff?
When Jonathan became mayor, I predicted that he'd be the finest mayor the city's ever seen, and he has not showed me wrong so far. Along with Steve, I agree with the economic development by putting a business advocate in the mayor's office, by focusing on economic development, and by focusing on things like making it. I think something like almost 90% of permits now are done within 20 days. That permitting process has been a thorn in the side of businesses, and so these kinds of focuses I think are great for the city, and he's the first mayor in a long time who promised that he would actually look very carefully at the poverty level in Tucson. We have one of the highest poverty levels in the nation in this city, and Jonathan has moved in the direction to at least examine what we can do about that. And he's also tried to build a partnership with all of the schools, from University, Pima College, down to the elementary and K through 12 schools, to try to talk about how we can move people from education into jobs right away whenever possible.
But I still hear from businessmen saying that it's very difficult to get permits here. It's very expensive. It's very time-consuming. And so there are a lot of areas where we do need for him to really mean that about making this city much more business friendly. We also pay higher property taxes than they do in Maricopa. The sales taxes are higher, and so we are not as business friendly as a lot of the cities and areas around us.
Okay, Carolyn, we also had a situation this week in the U.S. Senate race. Will Cardin is now under attack from the Club for Growth, which is supporting Jeff Flake. They're spending about $500,000 on some TV ads there, and Cardin himself has put out some ads regarding Jeff Flake, putting Flake in a picture with Obama. Does Flake have a primary challenge here that he needs to really worry about?
Oh yeah, he has a real challenge because some of the things that he's saying about Will are not correct. The $8 million tax increase that they were talking about actually came from Prop 400 out of Maricopa County, and it was simply extending that as opposed to canceling it. So it wasn't like a new tax, and so some of the other things are questionable about what he's saying. So yeah, Jeff has a real race.
And we've got about a minute left here, Jeff. But of course, the winner of that is going to be facing former Surgeon General Richard Carmona, and this week Richard Carmona kind of stepped away from Obama. We've seen a bit of that going on with the Ron Barber campaign as well. Is Obama a bit toxic to politicians here in Arizona?
I don't think so. Arizona is a more conservative state than many other states, and so perhaps people are thinking we're not, going to fully embrace him. But I didn't take Dr. Carmona's comments as meaning he was trying to distance himself from him. We're all different. I don't agree with the president on everything. There are several areas that I would do things differently, but he's a Democrat and he stands for the values that I believe in, and I believe that Ron Barber and Richard Carmona both agree with me on that.
All right, about 10 seconds left to you, but you've also crossed party lines to support Richard Carmona.
Sure, but my take on this is that when you see somebody photoshopping the president's face onto Jeff Flake, it strikes me as this is just yet another indication of how difficult it is for even a moderately centrist Republican to run in this state. I mean, look at what the party is doing right now to Ray Carroll, one of the finest Republican supervisors we've had, and he's got some whack job running against him right now. The party owes Ray Carroll more than what they're giving him right now. They ought to be supporting him instead of forcing him into a primary against a far right-wing guy.
All right, we're gonna have to leave it there, but we'll tackle that before long, Carolyn, I promise you. It's all the time we have tonight. You can dig deeper into Southern Arizona's political news by visiting azpm.org/your vote. And while you're on our website, let us know what you thought about tonight's program by leaving us a comment. And to find out the latest from AZPM, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Stay tuned next for the News Hour, and then at 8:30, tune into Arizona Week for an in-depth look at the economics of Arizona's trade with Mexico. I'm Jim Ninsel. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.